Before the 8th century in Ireland, there's little record of its music. It was a hunter-gatherer society and life was tough. Your survival depended on what you could find or kill. But things were changing. It was a time of rapid advancement for the Irish people, due in no small part to the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture. Now, you might not think of a parsnip or spud as a technological advancement, but growing vegetables and raising livestock can create more leisure time, and that means more time for music.
The history of Irish music is as rich and magical as the island itself. Join me as we travel across Ireland and even down to the local pub to discover what makes Irish music so fascinating. This is Journey into Irish Music. The 8th century was an exciting time to be in Ireland. Not only was the country transitioning to farming, but the arts and culture were also rapidly advancing. Now, that's not to say that the people completely abandoned their old superstitions. Like any culture, Irish history is awash in myth and fairy stories, and they certainly had their own ideas about what goes bump in the night, and what to do about it when it does.
Archaeologist Chris Reed recently discovered something very interesting in an Irish dig site dated to the 700s. 2 skeletons buried with stones in their mouths. But why?
It's thought that the stones were placed there to prevent the recently dead from rising from their graves to terrorize the living, like zombies or vampires. But for whatever reason, this predates the popularity of the European myth of vampires by about 800 years. But it wasn't all about superstition and vampires. The 8th century also saw the emergence of Irish metalsmiths. Treasures like the Ardagh chalice and the Tara brooch came from this period and rivaled or bested anything being produced in Europe at the time.
But that's not all.
Fans of laser swords and space battles might recognize this place, Skellig Michael. Back then, a different kind of monk would have lived a simple monastic life here, which must have been particularly boring because they were also explorers of a sort. They sailed out further north than the Irish people had ever gone before, and were the first to make written record of ice in the Arctic Sea. There was rapid advancement in medicine as well. There's evidence in County Donegal that surgeons were operating on the brains of their patients who not only survived the operations, but lived long enough for their skulls to actually heal. And yet, with all of these advancements, the cow still played an integral role in society. A cow was a very measurable form of wealth in 8th century Ireland. A cow produces milk, meat, and fertilizer, all very valuable commodities. Someone who owned even a few cows was quite well off, and someone with many cows was very wealthy indeed. Wars were fought over cows, and cattle raids were a real threat to the very survival of a small village. In other words, cattle were kind of a big deal. But just how valuable were cows? Or perhaps the question should be, how many cows was a person worth? And what the heck do cows have to do with music?
Some of the first written references to music in Ireland were from this time period. There was certainly a tradition of music before then, but there isn't much written about it before Brehon law.
The laws were not a criminal code as such, and it didn't really fully define what was or wasn't legal at the time. It was more of a civil code, defining things like compensation for harm, inheritance, business contracts, and social status. There's little doubt that noblemen, the rulers of the time, sat atop of society. But what about everyone else? Contained in Brehon law is quite a bit on the societal value of landowners, smiths, doctors, and yes, musicians. All measured in a very special currency: cows. You see, back then, just as it is today, music was a vital part of Irish culture. A skilled musician could rise through society's ranks to become one of the most valued members of a lord's court.
This must be partially due to the fact that a really good musician could bolster his lord's standing among his high society contemporaries with a really dynamite song. My Lord McMullen, he's strong as Cuchulainn. It needs work, but it shows the value of a musician, and Brehon law sought to quantify that value.
There were 7 tiers, or ranks, defined for musicians, and most valued of all were the harpers. While a flute or trumpet player might not even merit a rank regardless of how skilled they were, a master harper in the service of a lord had real wealth and status. There you have it. Cows were so important to Irish society that if you had enough of them, you could attain the rank of cow lord and sit nearly at the very top of society, just below actual nobles. So, if you were a master harper in the service of a nobleman, you had equal societal rights as a smith, doctor, or even a cow lord. And if you taught harp, you were even more venerated, and your life was worth up to 4 cows. A veritable fortune. Little remains of the actual music that was played by these harpers, but it is important to note just how high a value society placed on their music. They were the rock stars of their day, and with the advent of Brehon law, their place in Irish culture was formally defined. Ireland was making great strides in technology, agriculture, science, and medicine, but they did not ignore how vital a role music played in their everyday lives.
With the value of music defined by Brehon law, Irish musicians could continue to make a significant contribution to Irish society in the 8th century and beyond. Just in time for the Viking invasion.